traditional at the start of these debates to say what a pleasure it is to serve under your chairmanship, and today it's really true. It is. I want to begin by congratulating my honourable friend and parliamentary neighbour, the member for Wolverhampton South West, on securing this debate, and by thanking the Minister for his close engagement in this issue in recent weeks since the company went into liquidation. As the Honourable Member for Stirling has just said, there are many aspects of Carillion's collapse which are the subject of the Select Committee inquiries by the Select Committees for the Department of Work and Pensions and the Department of Business. They include things like how the company got itself into such financial trouble, why so many big contracts went wrong at the same time, why the company kept paying out dividends while the pension deficit was being built up, and many other questions. But today we're focused on one in particular, which is the question about Carillion and its staff. At the time of the company's collapse, Carillion employed roughly 20,000 people in the United Kingdom and a similar number abroad, with 450 employed in its Wolverhampton headquarters. Since then, over 1,000 of these workers have lost their jobs. And many of these would have had access to the various voluntary redundancy schemes that the company put forward in the 18 months or so in the run-up to collapse. And this raises a moral dilemma here, because workers who had perhaps 20 or 30 years of service would have got quite generous voluntary redundancy payments had they pursued that option in the run-up to the company's collapse. So the first question raised here is, what is the gap in knowledge between the workers who are simply doing their jobs, perhaps thinking there might be another round of voluntary redundancy or another couple of rounds, there's no urgency about this, and those at the top of the company who were desperately trying to keep the company afloat? What was the difference between what they knew about the prospects for the company's collapse and the workers who perhaps didn't? And I will give way in just a second. The difference, that gap in knowledge, can result in a loss of tens of thousands of pounds in the difference in terms between what someone would have got under voluntary redundancy and the bare statutory minimum that they are now entitled to if they lose their job.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and he's making a really, really important point here. A constituent of mine came to see me about the lack of information they've received from Carillion, and the downright lies, quite frankly, they've been told by their management and their leadership. They were told that they were going to be made redundant on the 31st of January, and the goalposts have been moved time and time again. Now staff in Sheffield are being made redundant on a rolling basis, but they quite frankly just don't know when they're going to be made redundant. And staff who've been there 20 or 30 years, as my honourable friend has said, are running the risk of losing out on significant redundancy payments or choosing to leave the company and find extra work there. So I really hope the Minister will respond to this issue about information and transparency within the company as well when he responds.
Well, I think my honourable friend makes a good point. And as I say, the first thing I want to raise is this question of voluntary redundancy and the payments, or the question of redundancy and the payments available to those 1,000 or so who've lost their job. But the second issue is about the workers who are left. Carillion was, of course, a very complex web of contracts, covering sectors as diverse as the Ministry of Defence, construction, prisons, school maintenance, cleaning, and a whole number of other things. The official receiver is now going through these contracts and looking for alternative suppliers to take them over. The question is, and the central question before us in the debate today is, on what terms will these be taken over? On what pay levels and what conditions for the workers who find themselves transferred over? Yes, I'll give way.
In a good way. He's making a very valid point about the terms and conditions. And I wonder if he was as concerned as I was to read the reports about Serco picking up contracts, and I think about 50 NHS sites somewhere in England, I can't remember exactly where it was, and the chief executive saying that they had saved £20 million in the contract. And I wonder whether the honourable gentleman agrees with me that my concern is that that £20 million might be the terms and conditions, the wages of the workforce.
Well, I quite agree that that is a concern. And of course, the context of this is a company that went into financial collapse while running these contracts. So it hardly looks as though they were making a big killing out of their public sector contracts. Frankly, if they were, they wouldn't have gone bust. So the company, the margins were already thin here. And the public sector has, in fact, over the years, proven itself more adept at driving narrow margins. And my concern is that somebody who takes over drives that down further in precisely the way that the honourable member said, and that the people who pay the price for this are workers, some of whom are on quite low pay to begin with. Now, the legal position is that normally TUPE does not apply in circumstances where there is an insolvency. I think members here understand that. But the point being made is that this is such a complex web of contracts, and there is such a significant public interest here, that where there's a proliferation of new suppliers, there is a strong case that it should apply at least where employment is rolled over. Now, given, as I said, Carillion's collapse into liquidation, it's hard to say that these were very heavy margins that were being earned in these contracts in the first place. The Secretary of State for the Cabinet Office seemed to agree with this point when he told the House shortly after the company's collapse, and I quote, that the official receiver was looking at whether it can offer arrangements whereby workers are no worse off than they were under the terms of their Carillion employment. Well, I agree with what the Secretary of State for the Cabinet Office said on that occasion, and that's the point I really want to stress today. I think all of us understand, sadly, that in a case of insolvency, there may be some job losses. And part of the reason why, legally speaking, TUPE doesn't apply in situations of an insolvency is because there will be job losses. So the question today to the Minister is a slightly different one. It is that even if we understand that there are job losses, can the government and the official receiver not insist that where we're not talking about job losses, but we're talking about employment being rolled over from Carillion to an alternative supplier, that on this occasion, given the public interest, that the existing terms and conditions apply as though TUPE did apply. I think that would be reasonable, it would be fair to those workers, it would be fair in terms of the public interest, and I think that on this occasion, it is the right thing to do.
Jim